Maybe it fixed itself. I know, I called the IT guy and he wasn't here and it got fixed, so who knows. All right, good morning, everybody. We're glad to see you here today. If your church is like anything like ours, you'll see a few people trickle in as we start. But I like to start on time because I usually have a lot to say, and I like to get you out on time too. So it's just the way I do it. So we're in the middle of a study right now, which we just started on the 12 apostles, or you might hear them called disciples. Okay, so there are a couple different things there. We're actually going to be introducing today just the first one. We're going to introduce Peter, but we're actually going to still be doing a little bit of background information. So this is going to be relevant to all of us today. I have been reading this book called 12 Ordinary Men. It's by John MacArthur. This is available in print. You can get an ebook. You can get an audiobook. I have all three. So I use it in different ways. So there's also a workbook out there. So if you really like this stuff or like the information, you can get the workbook. And they actually have daily activities to do every day. And you can go through it week to week, and it's a really good resource. So let's begin with this passage here this morning. It says, "And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren." We're gonna come back to this passage later this morning. But I want you to see something there. This is Jesus talking, okay? And he says to Simon, he says, "But I have prayed for you, that you wouldn't lose your faith, that you would do." It fixed itself. The threat of me calling you fixed it.
That's what it was.
Okay, all right. So, in the Gospels, we have 4 lists, well, the Gospels and Acts. We have 4 lists of apostles, okay? So in this chart, which I can take no credit for, I was dreading making my PowerPoint yesterday, having to do this myself, but I found a really nice chart that I stole, and I don't know who it's from, so I need to give them credit, but I'll do that next week. So I want you to look at this list. What do you notice? Is there anything you notice about this list? Now, the person that made this list helps you a little bit, but is there anything you notice about this list? Now, this is the list in order that they're listed. There's a couple of things that I noticed right away. What do you got, Zoe? Okay, so you notice Matthew and Bartholomew Bartholomew and Matthew are switched, and then there's Thomas and some other things. Okay, what else do we notice?
Peter's always named first.
Okay, Peter's always named first, but on one of them it says Peter, on the other 3 it says Simon. Now we know that he got a new name, and we're going to spend a lot of time on his name today and the significance of that. So that's one thing. Anything else you notice? Or Jess?
Judas didn't make it to Acts.
Oh, well, why is Judas Iscariot not in Acts? He's not alive anymore. He's hung himself because he betrayed Jesus, right? So he's not listed there. Okay, so Judas, that's another thing. What else? Zoe? Okay, interesting thing. Some of these guys had more than one name. So some of them, in fact, this Thaddeus here, in fact, in Matthew is actually not listed as Thaddeus. In my list, it says Lebbaeus, Lebbaeus. Same person, different names. So a lot of these guys had different names, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. So the things that I wrote down, there's also one other thing, but it says Peter is thought of very highly, because if you notice, Peter's listed up here, and if you know anything about the apostles, you'll know that Peter, James, and John are the closest to Jesus. They're his inner circle. Okay? And obviously, Judas Iscariot is about as far away from Jesus as you can get, in essence, right? Because he's the one that's going to betray him. Very interesting. We're going to go through this, but very interesting. If you notice, all the lists, Peter is listed first, and then there are 3 guys listed after him: James, John, and Andrew. Okay? So those 4 are like a group. We're going to call these groups. The second group starts with Philip, and Philip is going to be the leader of that group, and the other 3 guys, Bartholomew, Thomas, and Matthew, are listed underneath him. Now, in different orders, not always the same, but Philip is always listed first. The next group is going to be James, son of Alphaeus. He's going to be listed first in everyone. You're going to have Thaddeus or Lebbaeus. You're going to have Simon the Zealot. Then they have Simon the Cananean here, which is really the same as Simon the Zealot. Okay, so that's the same guy. Okay, and then Judas, son of James, is not Judas Iscariot. That's another Judas who is also called Thaddeus, who is also called Lebbaeus. Okay? I know it's confusing, but that's what we have. Okay? But those are the same guys. So we're going to break these guys down into 4 groups. Group number 1, Peter is going to be the leader, and it makes sense, right? I mean, he's the guy that's probably, if not the closest to Jesus, he's certainly the one that interacts with Jesus the most. He's the one that Jesus has, well, really Jesus has to mold the most. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that today. Group 2, we have the leader of being Philip, and then we have the other 3 guys, and then group 3, the leader is going to be James, son of Alphaeus. Now, these groups actually seem to be listed in the order of their importance or closeness to Jesus. The top 4 guys are going to be in, especially the top 3 guys, are going to be listed in almost all the major events in Jesus' life, okay, during his ministry. The next group is going to be listed in a lot of things, and they're going to be very important in the faith. The last group we don't know much about. In fact, the only one we really know anything about is Judas Iscariot, and we only know about him because he's going to betray Jesus. Okay? So, and as we work through, those of you that will be here longer, as we work through all of these, we're going to go through each of these guys and what we can learn from them. Okay? Let's look at the first group, though. Let's look why they're so important. So we're going to read some scriptures here this morning that are going to show some why I believe that these guys are definitely the closest. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 17. If you have your Bibles, turn there. We're going to read the first 9 verses to start with. We're going to read 4 different passages here of different events. Some pretty big events. Okay? So it says here, Matthew 17, starting in verse 1. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Who's the first one that speaks up here? Peter. It's always Peter. He's the guy that's going to say the first thing. Always. He's going to act. Because Peter, we're going to talk about some words to describe him later, but one of those words is going to be impulsive. Peter's impulsive. Let's look at Mark chapter 5. We're going to be in Mark for the next 3, so it'll be a little easier to find. Mark chapter 5. This is kind of a longer one, so I'm going to start reading. Starting in verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, Who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, Who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, Don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and he said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is dead. Not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. He took 3 with him. And then he told them, "Don't tell anybody." Okay? Very important. Here we go. Mark 13. A little shorter one. Starting in verse 1. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. Do you see all these great buildings?" Replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew this time asked him privately, "Tell us, what will these things happen? Or when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled?" Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still come. Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginning of birth pains. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them, and the gospel must first be preached to all nations." He tells these guys first that they are going to be dying for him, that they're going to be persecuted for him. These are the ones that he brings closely. Last one we're going to look at. It's still in the same chapter, but starting in verse 32. They went down to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little further, he fell to the ground, and he prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples, and he found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away, and he prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the 3rd time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." In Jesus' moment right before the cross, in his last moment, where he went to be in solitude with God, he took these 3 men with him. They're certainly close. This is certainly the group that is of these apostles that is going to be the leaders of the group that are going to go out. And Peter is clearly the leader of that group, at least the vocal leader. Now, group 2, from our list before, we're not ready for that yet. Okay. Group 2 does not have such a high profile, but they're still significant figures in the gospel account. Group 3 is more distant, and they are rarely mentioned. We already kind of talked about this, where we don't really know much about them other than Judas Iscariot. So this suggests that even a relatively small group of 12 is too large for one person to maintain close intimacy with each group member. Think about this. Jesus Christ.
It's actually Mark 14.
14. Did I put the wrong? Sorry. Mark 14, 32 through 42. Well, see, then you guys were following along. Thank you for that clarification. My apologies. Mark 14, 32 through 42. So make that correction. But think think about that. Jesus spends a lot of time with these guys. Now, he spends a lot more time with these three, and really, there's three of them that are really close, and then there's a fourth. But the rest of them, he doesn't seem to be as close to. That shows us that we are not going to have a lot of people in our lives where we can maintain a really close intimacy with. You're going to have a few. I've always thought that I'm friends with everybody. When I was going to school, I would not call anybody not a friend. I would sit by the kid that had no friends. I would sit by the kid that didn't shower. I didn't care. I wanted people to feel welcomed. I wanted people to feel like they had somebody that could be there for them. But I was also friends with the jocks, and I was friends with the cheerleaders, and I was friends with the nerds, and I was a nerd, so that probably helped. But I was friends with all of them. And in fact, I got invited to everything. I often declined to go to things because some of those things were not things I wanted to partake in. But I got invited to everything. But they also knew about me that I probably wasn't going to come. They knew who I was. But I didn't have a lot. I only had a few that I was really close with. I'm still pretty close with most of them. Not necessarily high school friends, but when you get to college, there's more. But it's difficult to develop that. And Jesus, he's going to draw these three or four guys. He's going to put them really close to himself, and he's going to teach them more than others. Maybe because he knows that they're the ones that are ready to hear it. Maybe he knows that they're the ones that are going to be able to motivate the rest of them and encourage the rest of them and teach the rest of them to do that work. But certainly, we see a lot of examples in the New Testament where these three guys, all the big events, they're with Jesus. Think about the Transfiguration. That event I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that. But they were going to see God and hear from God. We haven't heard from God in how many years? 400 years at least, that he hasn't spoken to his people. And before he was speaking through the prophets, right? He wasn't speaking. So he brings these guys up, and there they are, Elijah and Moses and Jesus, to teach them a message. Number one, this is what my glory is going to look like. But number two, the Son of God is actually more important than Moses and Elijah.
Well, one thing, too, I think, is if you look back to when Jesus' public ministry started until the time that he was crucified, okay, we've got 3 years. He didn't have time to invest that same amount of effort in all 12. He had to kind of pick the 4 that he knew were going to be able to take it forward and really work with them.
Well, and we even from 12. Remember last week we talked about how at one point Jesus sends out 70 disciples. And we know he had many more than that. We talked about when he fed the 5,000. He feeds the 5,000. And actually, James talked about this week during his lesson. So if you remember that. But remember he feeds the 5,000 and they fed them, right? And then what happens? Jesus and the disciples leave. And the crowds follow him. Why? Not because they want more teaching. They want more food. They had their fill. And he gets mad at them, doesn't he? He says, look, you guys are just here because you ate. And then he goes on and he tells them something very profound. He basically tells them, you're going to die for the faith if you want to follow me. And what happens? A lot of them leave. They leave. Now, in my mind, there's only 12 left. Now, some people will say there was probably more still there, but it says right after that, and in Luke, remember, Luke is very meticulous. And he says, and then he turned and spoke to the 12. So maybe there's a few over here that are not considered part of the 12, and they're still there. And then there's another group. Or maybe there's only 12 left. I don't know. I can't prove it either way. But I'm just saying, at least he's got those 12, and he's like, I know you guys are going to stick around. And he even knows that Judas is not going to stick around forever. And he's part of this group. And so we have this group, and it's an incredible group. It's a varied group, too. We actually don't know the occupation of several of them. We know that 4 are fishermen. We have 2 sets of brothers. We have a tax collector, which is interesting because it's very important that they have a tax collector, because they were the people that were considered like the most vile of all people, because they were working for the Romans. And also, if you think about a tax collector, Matthew was actually a loner. So now you have this loner tax collector who joins a group. And then, the craziest one of all, I think, is the zealot. Okay, I want you to think about this. You may not know a lot about zealots, but the zealots were a political organization that used assassination and intimidation to get their policies instituted by governments. Does that sound like anything going on in the world today? Yeah, they were basically terrorists in the name of God. So they thought. Now, whether they were justified or not, I don't know. Maybe they were sometimes. I don't know. But they were assassinating people. And they pick this guy, who is another kind of loner, who has a political ideology. Oh, and by the way, the zealot would have hated the tax collector who worked for the Romans. I mean, what a group of guys. You know, we talked about how they're very ordinary guys. They're not just, it's not like they were perfect. I mean, we're going to talk about Peter today, and I mean, you can name as many faults from Peter as you can name the things that he did well. And we're going to talk about that. So, let's get into Peter. All right, so here we go. First question for you. What are some things you know about Peter? All right, anybody, everybody, whatever. What do you know about Peter? Some things you know about Peter. I have a list, but hopefully you'll come up with some things I didn't come up with.
Here's rash.
He was rash. Okay, I like that word. Elizabeth. Okay, so he denies Christ 3 times. After he tells Christ, I will not deny you. Man, we want to think about ourselves that we wouldn't do that we wouldn't look at Jesus in the face and say, I am not going to betray you, and then not even hours later, you're betraying him. You know, when that rooster crowed, what do you think went through Peter's mind?
Well, the scripture said he went away and wept.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying, but think about, yes, he wept, but I mean, when you've done something wrong, the first time he did it, he felt it. The second time he did it, he felt it. He's probably fearing for his life. The third time he did it, and then the rooster crows, I mean, the feeling in his stomach, I mean, I don't know. It would have been really tough. He would have been so ill, I think, that he probably couldn't stand. I mean, he was praying.
He's the only other person that was able to walk on water.
Okay, so he walks on water. Okay, Marcus?
He wasn't afraid to fail.
He was not afraid to fail. I like that.
I think he had courage. He had the courage to get out of the boat and walk on the water. He had the courage to cut off the servant's ear with a whole bunch of soldiers around.
Yep.
He had the courage to admit when he was wrong.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
I'd call him impetuous.
Okay, that's on my list. Impetuous. I like that.
Jesus gave him a chance after he arose to make it right and asked him 3 times, do you love me?
Okay, we're going to go through that story today too. Absolutely. Okay, what else? Anybody else? Do we know anything else about him? I have another question for you too, because we're gonna pick some names here. Okay, so we already talked about a couple of these. His name, Jesus is going to give him a new name. Okay, his name is going to be Simon, and we're going to spend a bunch of time on that here in a minute. He's going to get a new name, but his name is going to mean the rock. Okay, and so Jesus picks this name, so that's going to be important. We're going to talk about that. We already talked about how he's part of Jesus' inner circle. Okay, he's really close to Jesus. Okay, he's a pillar of the church in the New Testament. Okay, absolutely. I mean, Paul and Peter are the 2 guys that are going to, in the New Testament, the readings, the writings, all the things going on, we're going to see, they're going to be pillars of that. He walked on water, I have that down. He disowned Jesus 3 times. He prayed on the day of Pentecost. The absolute most important day that the message was going to go to the world, to the masses, Peter's the guy that's chosen to preach. Okay? He had a vision about clean and unclean animals because he's stubborn, which we're going to get to that in a minute. He has that. He looks, he sees that, and he goes, well, I can't eat that. No, get up and kill. He says, everything that you've made, I've made clean. It's not unclean anymore. And the message is the Gentiles are now, right? He's going to go and do that. He was a martyr. He's going to die for the faith. We know that he was married. We know he was a fisherman. And we actually know that he escaped from prison. Okay? So those are the things that I listed. There's probably some other things. Now, the next question is, what are some words you would use to describe Peter? Okay, we already said impetuous. That's a good word. What else? Elizabeth? Loyal.
You use the word stubborn, but you're loyal.
Yeah, he's stubborn, yeah, but he is loyal. He is loyal. Have you ever heard the phrase loyal to a fault?
Yeah.
He didn't do it because he thought, what he did, he thought was right. He always thought he was right in the moment. Okay? It's not like he was just willy-nilly like, well, I just like sin, so I'm just going to go out and do it. That wasn't Peter. Peter was always about, this is right, and I'm going to do it, and after he does it, he goes, darn it, that wasn't the right move, right? Oh, I thought you got something? Okay, just playing with the wavy locks. Okay.
He's probably the most three-dimensional the apostles in terms of how the Bible described him. Because the one thing that I'd always thought of was when Christ had told them to go back out, brought their nets down again after they caught everything. They come back in, and the nets are full, and Christ said, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man."
Right.
Yeah,
He's so repentant. He understands that when he's wrong, he shouldn't even be in the presence of God. He doesn't deserve it. Like that's a really good character quality. Okay? What else? Yeah.
He was devoted.
Devoted. Absolutely. He was devoted. He's the first one that's really going to follow Jesus. He's the one that's going to say, when they come to call him and they say, put down your nets and follow me, what happened? They just drop their stuff and they go.
He was uneducated. He had no formal education.
That's actually a really important point. He doesn't have a formal education. In fact, many people believe that the Gospel of Mark is really the Gospel of Peter, written by Mark from Peter's dictation. Okay? There's actually some question as to whether or not 2 Peter was actually written or dictated by Peter, because it's written in a much different form. Now, I believe that it was probably a different scribe, that he had a different student that was helping him write that. But there's some question on the authorship of that because of the date, because of some things that he refers to. But he can't write it down himself. You ever known somebody like that? They're a smart person, but they're not educated. So they can't write, they can't read, but when you listen to them, and a lot of times they are impulsive. They do what they feel is right. They just do it because that's who they are. And that's Peter. He's not educated, at least not formally. It's possible that he got more education as he went through life, but we don't really think that, okay? And so there's some of that. What else? Anything else? Any other? What?
He was called the Rock.
He's called the Rock, okay? And at times he is the Rock.
Well,
But
his name, Peter, meant pebble.
Stone.
His name, Simon,
Yeah.
Cephas, meant pebble, but Peter meant rock,
Yeah.
boulder. And
Yeah.
Jesus named him that after he declared his faith that he was the Son of God.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's see what else I had written down. He's an apostle, fisherman, the Rock, stubborn. Okay, this is the guy that wrote this, John MacArthur, the 12 Ordinary Men book that I showed you earlier. He calls Peter the apostle with the foot-shaped mouth. I think that is a great descriptor of Peter. The apostle with the foot-shaped mouth. Because Peter often would put his foot in his mouth, because Peter, his biggest fault was he didn't think before he acted. But you know what? That might have been his greatest strength too. Because somebody's got to step up. When it was time to get out of the boat and walk on the water, he got out of the boat. Now, he lost his faith pretty quickly when the wind started to blow, but he got out of the boat. Would you have gotten out of the boat?
Yeah.
If you say yes, I hope so. But I'm guessing a lot of us would have been like, you know what, I'm going to let Peter go first, and then I'll get out. Yeah.
11 did.
That's true.
I definitely would have gotten out of the boat, but I also have a foot-shaped mouth, so
Hey, so it fits, right? It fits. So,
if the shoe fits.
hey, this guy has the same humor I do. It's great. All right. Yeah. So I like that. He's going to say what's on his mind. There are people like that. And sometimes you get annoyed with them. You're like, you really shouldn't tell people that. It's like, but they just tell you. It is. It's what it is. And that's okay. I think that's a great quality of his, but also it gets him in trouble a bit. He's going to be a preacher. He's impetuous, and that's really what that word means, right? Always speaking your mind. Always just, like, whatever's on your mind is going to come out. Like, Peter wears his emotions on his sleeve, right? There is never a time where Peter is like, oh, we don't know what Peter's thinking. Right? It's just not. Like, when in Jesus, when he goes to them and says, strictly, do not tell people about this. I'm thinking he's talking directly to Peter here. Like, you can't tell him this happened. This is you, buddy. This is your job. You've got one job. Don't tell anybody this happened. Okay? Like, that's how I think of Jesus and Peter. Like, this, like, almost like talking to a child sometimes. Did you have something?
Yeah, the other thing too is he's fairly susceptible to peer pressure.
Absolutely. Absolutely, he is. But he's usually the first one to act. So sometimes he can do what everybody else wants to do, but like a lot of times they're following him. In fact, they will follow. The apostles, the other apostles will follow Peter, even if he's wrong. So a lot of times. So there is a lot going on here. I also have down impulsive and decisive, or some of the words that I put up here. Okay, let's talk about his name now, because his name, this is fascinating. And I kind of knew this when I started going through this, but I'm overwhelmed at the many of examples that go through here. So let's first talk about Simon, okay? We know that Simon was a very common name, okay? So it's really hard to read back there. Okay, you guys have a little better up here. Simon, we have a lot of different Simons. We have Simon Peter, who the one that we're talking about today, but we also have Simon the Zealot. So in the group of 12, there are 2 Simons, okay? So these are just the ones that we have listed in the New Testament. Okay, so we have that. Then we have, in Matthew chapter 13, verse 45, Jesus' half-brothers are listed, and one of them is named Simon. Okay? Judas Iscariot's father was also called Simon, in John chapter 6, verse 71. In Matthew 26:6 mentions that Jesus had a meal at the house of a man in Bethany named Simon the leper. We have another Simon, a Pharisee, who hosted Jesus at a similar meal in Luke chapter 7. And then we have the man who's conscripted to carry Jesus' cross partway to Calvary, was Simon the Cyrene in Matthew 27. So clearly, just in the gospel accounts, we can come up with 7 different Simons without doing any extra outside research. So there's a lot of Simons. Simon is a very common name. Now, our Simon's full name at birth was Simon Bar-Jonah. Okay? Simon Bar-Jonah. So the last names are weird because it's like Bar means like son of. So Simon, son of Jonah. Simon Bar-Jonah. Does that kind of make sense, right? So what was his dad's name? Jonah or John or Jonas. So if you think about the Jonas brothers, I never thought about this before, but that's just a play on that name of Jonah or John. Okay, so those are all similar names. Okay, and so he's there, and that they tell us that in Matthew 16, verse 17, meaning Simon, son of Jonah. Okay, Simon Peter's father's name was then John, sometimes rendered as Jonas or Jonah. We know nothing more about his parents. Nothing. Interesting, huh? This guy that we know all of this about, who is a pillar of the faith, we know nothing about his parents.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, we know he lived with his mother-in-law.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that. So we do know that, but that would be his wife's mother. We don't know much about his parents, right? So next, we're going to notice that the Lord gave him another name. Luke introduces him this way. I don't know if I put it up there. No, I didn't. Okay. Luke lists him this way. Simon, whom he also named Peter. Okay? Luke's choice of words here is important. Jesus didn't merely give him a new name to replace the old name. He also named him Peter. That's going to be very important. This disciple was known sometimes as Simon, sometimes as Peter, and sometimes as Simon Peter. Okay? Peter was sort of a nickname. It means rock. In Aramaic, equivalent is Cephas. So when you see him called Cephas, some will, like Paul especially calls him Cephas. And there's a couple of times otherwise that we see that. So in John chapter 1, verse 42, it says, this is Jesus' first face-to-face meeting with Simon Peter, and he says this. Now when Jesus looked at him, he said, you are Simon the son of Jonah, you will be called Cephas. Now Peter is the Greek form of the Aramaic word Cephas. So that's why you get 2 names, okay? So here. So if you see Cephas, it means Peter. That's also why that list I showed you earlier with all the different names, it also depended on what audience the author was writing to. Okay, yes, it's written in Greek, but if he was writing to the Jews, he would have used the Hebrew form of a name or not. So depending on what they were doing. Okay? So those were apparently the first words. These are for the first words Jesus ever says to Peter that we know of. And from then on, the rock was his nickname. Now sometimes, however, Jesus refers to him as Simon anyway. When you see scripture like that, it is often a signal that Peter has done something that he needs rebuke or correction from. Okay, very interesting. So, I don't think we're ready for that yet. Sorry, I need to turn my page. I meant to turn my page and not the thing. The nickname was significant, okay? And the Lord had a specific reason for choosing it. By nature, Simon was brash, vacillating, and undependable. Okay, hear that, undependable. He tended to make great promises he couldn't follow through with. He was one of those people who appears to lunge wholeheartedly into something, but then bails out before finishing. I'm going to walk on the water, but I'm not going to get all the way to Jesus. Okay? He was usually the first one in, and too often he was the first one out. When Jesus met him, he fit James's description of a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Jesus changed Simon's name, it appears, because he wanted the nickname to be a perpetual reminder to him about who he should be. And from that point on, whatever Jesus called him sent him a subtle message. If he called him Simon, he was signaling him that he was acting like his old self. If he called him the Rock, he was commending him for acting the way that he ought to be acting. Okay? Let me tell you a story. Tommy Lasorda, former manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team, tells the story of a young, skinny pitcher who was new in the Dodgers minor league system. The youngster was somewhat timid, but had an extraordinarily powerful and accurate arm. Lasorda was convinced that the young pitcher had the potential to be one of the greatest ever. But Lasorda says the young man needed to be more fierce and competitive. He needed to lose his timidity. So Lasorda gave him a nickname that was exactly the opposite of his personality. He gave him the nickname Bulldog. Anybody know who it is? Remember? Over the years, that is exactly what Oral Hershiser became. One of the most tenacious competitors who ever took the mound in the major leagues. The nickname became a perpetual reminder of what he ought to be, and before long, it shaped his whole attitude. This Jesus guy's pretty smart, isn't he? Pretty smart. The young man named Simon, who would become Peter, was impetuous, impulsive, and overeager. He needed to become like a rock. So that is what Jesus named him. From then on, the Lord could gently chide or commend him just by using one name or the other. And guess what was so great about it? He could call him one of those names or the other, and unless you absolutely knew, you would have no idea whether he was commending him or chiding him. And it would be a nice little nudge for Peter to get back on track. What a great way. Okay, you kids, I'm gonna give you one, okay? You guys should know this already. But if your parents use your legal name, including the middle name, this is them, but they're not subtle about it. Just remember, Jesus is cooler, okay? Your parents are great, but Jesus is cooler, all right? But Jesus used this. I love it. I think it's great. And your parents may even have a word for you that they say, and when you hear that word, you're like, oops. Right? Oops. Or if it was my grandmother, it was like, she'd tell you to go out and pick your own switch. By the way, the little switch is not what you want to pick. You want the bigger thing, right? Anyway. All right, so we see scriptures refer to him in two ways with these names. The first one is in a secular context. So when you're talking about Jesus, it's almost always dependent upon what Peter has done. But in other ways, when we talk about, it's going to be different, okay? So the first one is secular. So anytime we talk to about, like, when Scripture refers to his house, it's going to be Simon's house, okay? When Scripture refers to his mother-in-law, it's going to be Simon's wife's mother, okay? When in his fishing business, it's Simon's boats, okay? You're going to see that all the way through. When his old name Simon is used in this context, it usually has nothing to do with his character or spirituality. The second category of references where he is called Simon is seen whenever Peter is displaying characteristics of his unregenerate self, when he was sinning in word, attitude, or action. So the first one we're going to look at is Luke 5:5. It says, Simon answered and said to him, Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net. He's being Simon. He's going, I don't really believe this is going to work, but I'll do it anyway. Now, that's the cool thing about Peter. He may not have believed it worked, but he still put the net in the water, right? Some of us would have just been like, it's not going to work. How many times have you had a kid where you're like, hey, it's not going to work, it's not going to work, and you're like, just try it, and they don't want to try it. They don't even want to try it, okay? And then when they try it, they're like, wow, it worked. I don't know how that could be possible. It's like, This is the young Simon the fisherman, skeptical and reluctant. But in verse 8 of the same passage, Peter starts to see Jesus' majesty. He says, when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. It takes him moments to realize what he's done. And what is he? He becomes repentant. In fact, so much so that he says, I can't even be in your presence. And what happens? Remember, Luke is meticulous. You really think Luke wanted to call him Simon in verse 5 and then change it to Simon Peter in verse 8 just because? There's no way. Luke is meticulous. He's a doctor. It's going to be exactly what he wants. And he puts it in there and he says, look, Simon Peter has fallen down and he is saying, look, he's repentant, right? We see Jesus call him Simon in reference to key failures in his career. Luke 22:31, when predicting Peter's betrayal. Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. And as we read earlier in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Peter is supposed to be on watch, but he is sleeping, Jesus calls him Simon again. Peter probably cringes every time Jesus calls him Simon at this point. He's probably like, dude, would you just call me the Rock? Like Dwayne Johnson, you know, he got that name, right? Different though. So John and Peter were very close, lifelong friends. And in the Gospel of John, John refers to Peter as Simon Peter 15 times. Apparently, John saw both qualities of Peter. He saw him sometimes be Simon, and he saw him sometimes be Peter. Guess what? John is going to be really close to Peter because John is very close to Jesus, and Peter is very close to Jesus, and they're all part of the inner circle. So why does John call him Simon Peter? My guess is because he sometimes saw him as Simon, and he sometimes saw him as Peter. So he just calls him Simon Peter. Okay? After the resurrection, Jesus instructed his disciples to return to Galilee. When he planned to appear to them in Matthew 28, impatient Simon apparently got tired of waiting. The Lord is coming. He get tired of waiting. So he announces that he's going back out to fishing. As usual, the other disciples dutifully follow their leader. They go to fish. They get into the boat, they fish all night, and guess what? They caught nothing. Okay? As would the story be. But Jesus met them on the shore the following morning, made breakfast for them. The entire purpose of this meeting, it seems, was the restoration of Peter. Okay? Interesting, he's there to see all of them, but who does he spend time with and fix? Peter. John 21:15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, indeed, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him for a third time. Do you think maybe he was hurt that he also called him Simon this time? Maybe. Do you love me? He said. Lord, you know all.